In December, the Defense Department signed off on 15 recommendations from its so-called Inclusion Board. Those recommendations are slated to be completed by the end of this month, March. According to the Pentagon, quote, Acting Defense Secretary Chris Miller signed a memo entitled Actions to Improve Racial and Ethnic Diversity and Inclusion in the U.S. Military, and that examined the culture of the military following the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, end quote. One of those recommendations was to, quote, remove aptitude test barriers that adversely impact diversity. Separately, the Pentagon is now reportedly considering lowering fitness standards for female recruits. The military had adopted a gender-neutral test that scored men and women on the same basis, the idea being they would have to fight the same wars. Turns out, though, that far more than half of the women who took the test failed it, so they apparently are ditching that. The question is whether or not this helps diversity. Will it help us win wars and defend the country? Douglas Macgregor is in a good position to answer that question. He's a retired Army colonel. We're happy to have him on tonight. Doug Macgregor, thanks so much for coming on. Sure. So the military is doing these things and has been doing them for a long time in order to achieve political goals. Most of us don't see the military as a political organization, but as our last line of defense against hostile foreign powers. Do these changes make it more or less likely the Pentagon will be able to defend the country?
Well, Tucker, I think the last 20 years have had a profoundly negative impact on the American military, particularly on the combat forces that have had to go through these long occupations, long deployments without clear missions and attainable objectives. And as a result of this, we've also fought a very weak enemy, an enemy without air forces, without air defenses, without armies. And people reach erroneous conclusions about the nature of combat under those circumstances. And I think to some extent that's what's happened now, so that there's a readiness to accommodate PC demands from policymakers who frankly have a cocktail level of familiarity with real war, when otherwise senior officers would put up much more serious resistance. So the answer to your question is, I think these policies are detrimental in most cases, and probably divisive.
So the rest of the world is, of course, paying close attention to this. We have been the world's supreme military power for a long time. What is the view of our adversaries and potential adversaries of these political changes that we've made to our military?
Well, none of our potential opponents, whether they are in the Middle East, Northeast Asia, Eastern Europe, doesn't make any difference. None of them would even think of adopting any of these positions and policies under any circumstances. They are training for the Super Bowl. And I think that's important for us to understand. We have been fighting, or essentially playing against pickup teams. We are not training, organizing, fighting power to deal with the Super Bowl. They are. So I think we're in for a real surprise under the circumstances. Many of the assumptions that we're making about what will or won't work, they will be destroyed.
I have to ask you, we're going to be doing, I think, a lot on this on the show, but China is projecting power all over this hemisphere, all throughout the Caribbean and Latin America, even very close to our shores in, for example, the Bahamas. Is the military aware, is the Pentagon aware of that? It doesn't, you almost never hear anything from the Pentagon about what looks like, obviously, a potential threat. Do you think they're paying attention, or the attention that they should be paying to this?
Oh, actually, I think they're doing more than paying attention. They talk about it all the time because they link their budgets and their force structures to this enormous Chinese threat that they hype. Quite frankly, I think it's overdone. And I think that it would make much more sense for us to talk to the Chinese, since we are the ones that sail carrier battle groups up and down the Straits of Taiwan. We are the ones that are challenging the Chinese in the South China Sea about their islets on ostensibly freedom of navigation missions. I think we might find that the Chinese are willing to talk to us and we can avoid collisions that way.
Interesting. I wonder, after, you know, all of these political, very sort of obvious political expressions from the military, if rank and file, the people who actually fight the wars, are confident in their leadership. Is it possible to know that?
It's difficult to ascertain. It depends on whom you talk to and under what circumstances. All I can tell you is that until you fight a really capable enemy, you can make many assumptions about the force that are erroneous. And I think that's where we are. We assume that certain things will work because they worked in Iraq or they worked in Afghanistan. They have no chance of working at all against the Chinese, the Russians, the Turks, any number of people. And we need to come to terms with that and back away from some of the policies that I don't think have been carefully considered in that context.
Colonel Douglas Macgregor, never had a conversation with you where I didn't learn something that I didn't know. I appreciate your coming on tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.